everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. This is Nicole with Topaz, and I'm very happy to welcome back our friend Blake Rudis, who's here to present Building Your Workflow Workbench. Hey, Blake.
Hello.
We are super excited to have Blake back. This is his 20th webinar with us, so it's a big deal, and very excited to have him present this session and see how he's been working with Topaz lately.
Excellent. Well, thank you. This is what, webinar 20? I can't believe it. I remember the first one, I was all like stuttering and nervous, and I think I talked like 5,000 miles a minute, which to most of you, you probably think I do that anyway, but it was even worse in the first one. But I want to thank Topaz for all these years of support and help for me, and recognizing the talents that I have and bringing them to the table for you. And they do that with a lot of artists, and I think that's really incredible, to have that kind of reach and to share that kind of knowledge instead of hold that stuff back. They give us a platform to embrace that and share it with people all over the world, and it's incredible. There's not many genuine companies that do that, so we have to give a really big kudos to Topaz Labs for affording us that. So with that, I'm going to be covering the building your workflow workbench. And typically, if you've seen some of my past webinars, they're very workflow extensive, where I discuss everything from the start of the image to the end of the image in the artistic workflow. But what I want to do with this webinar specifically is to show kind of how to build that workflow workbench with the newest Topaz product line, product being Topaz Texture Effects, which really is a workbench all on its own. It's not a tool. This runs the gamut of a lot of things that you can do with your photos and your images, and you can see two of them here. These are the two that I will definitely get to today. I have a third that I would like to get to, so we'll see if I can get to that point. So the first one is going to be this image, and what I'm going to do is basically just show you how you can build your own presets in something like Texture Effects. And then the second image, I'm going to be using this image to modify a preset that already exists in Texture Effects, but then also go into something like Glow and Impression to really take that image to the next level. And then if I get to the third one, I want to show how you can start with Impression and then go into Texture Effects. So you don't have to just use this as a standalone product. You can use it in conjunction with your normal workflow and your artistic workflow. So that's what I'm going to get to today. So let's go ahead and start this off with our first image of the surfer. So we'll just go and double click and open this up. So really, I haven't done much to this photograph. I saved it as a JPEG, and I made the resolution a little bit smaller, basically just for demonstration purposes. It tends to speed things up a little bit, but know that if I was going to be editing this photo, this is kind of what I would use going right into something like Texture Effects if I knew that I was just going to be doing the texture effects on that. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my background layer by pressing Command or Control J. This will ensure that I'm doing non-destructive editing, so everything that happens in Texture Effects, we'll just call this TE for Texture Effects, will happen on this layer. And this is going to give me some leeway in the future on how I can take the image that I've created to a whole nother level by incorporating some of the things that happen in the original image, which is always a good idea to duplicate that background layer. So I'm going to go up to Filter, Topaz Labs, and go to Texture Effects. And I just downloaded the new Texture Effects after talking to Nicole earlier today, and it's wicked fast now. So I really do like that. Very cool. So the whole idea behind Texture Effects is, yes, the word in front of it is Texture Effects, but once we get into building the preset, you're going to see that there's so much more to the image than just the textures that you can apply to an image. And if you know me well enough by now, if you've seen a couple of these webinars, any one of them, you'll know I'm not a preset person. I really don't care too much for presets because, to me, I feel like presets don't always work. It's like they're built for specific images. The difference here is the presets that are in Texture Effects are actually really awesome. It's one of those things where I could probably just say, okay, Fall Fairy Tale, let's just end it here, because that is a really wild-looking preset that's built right there. I don't have to do much to this. It's already created a really nice, ethereal feeling photo, which would be a good baseline for me to work off of later, or maybe even go in and modify that preset. So if you look at this, though, if we go into this Fall Fairy Tale, you'll see that this is a series of multiple different uh, layers that are added on here. So anyone who's never done any layer work in Photoshop and you're doing stuff here in Texture Effects, this is kind of the basics of Photoshop layering. You're building this image up. So what I want to really touch on with this, I'm going to go ahead and reset everything because I don't want to have anything here. I don't want to have any presets here. We're going to build a preset from scratch, essentially. Is I want you to understand that this is a build-up process. And the most successful images that have texture are the ones that have a thick build-up of artistic effects that are built on top of it. Very rarely can you just go in here and say, okay, I'm going to plop a texture on here and make it look, I don't want to say realistic because they don't look realistic in the end. That fall fairy tale didn't look like a real image, but it doesn't have that old world cross-processed or multiple processed type of look. A lot of these can even look like, if you want to look this up in the future, Polaroid emulsion lifts, if you've ever done any of that. It's an old school technique. It's a really cool technique if you have an old Polaroid land camera, but you can get those kinds of old world feeling effects by the different chemicals that would be put onto a regular piece of photo paper to create these artistic looks. So just putting one texture on here is not going to call this image good. It's not going to call this image done. It's a build-up process. All right, so now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead. So one of the things that I like to do with my textured images is I like to texture images that have a good solid canvas for them to work off of. I like to think of them as artistic pieces or almost like painted pieces. So for that I need to have something on there that's going to be a blank canvas to have that texture applied to. So the way I can do that here is I can immediately start this image off in the basic adjustments right here in Texture Effects. And yes, I could have done something like this in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, but I wanted to show you how Topaz has incorporated this basic adjustments here, which is a really good way to prep up your image for the editing process of a texture. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to increase the brightness quite a bit. So I'm increasing the brightness to about 0.79. Now, I'm basically creating a high key image, and a high key image is an image that has a lot of lights in it, where the blacks are kind of washed out. You get this really high key look. You get a white and almost like a contrasty type of image. So with that high key look, I now have the background area where the clouds are. If we can look at the before and after here, as we decrease that, the clouds have kind of been thrown out because I want that area to accept a lot of the texture. So that's one of the key things here, and this might be a personal take on texturing photos, personal artistic take, but one of the best tips I can give you is to start with a baseline image that has something there that's a blank canvas. So one thing that's great for this is if you're doing bird photography and there's a bird that's perched on a branch and the background is pure solid blue, but that bird is beautiful, well, the photo is less interesting because the background has nothing there to afford it for the focal point. So then that'd be a good place for texturing or for artistic effects. So now I'll go into the shadow area here and see what happens when I increase these shadows. So I'm opening up these shadows even more to again allow some of that texture to come through onto this image, and then we'll look at our highlights and increase those as well too. So I'm going to bring those up pretty high. So now I'm starting with this image that doesn't have a whole lot of typical photo contrast in it because I'm building it up. I want these textures to just wash over it. So I'll go ahead and just go ahead and minimize that, and at any point you can turn the eyeball on and off, which I really like about this because as you're building up these textures you can just turn the eyeball on and off to see if you don't like that one area, and it's very fast. So I'll go into that in a second here as I move on. So let's go into edge exposure. And what I like about edge exposure is you can kind of make it look like the old burned I don't know if you ever played with a box camera, pinhole camera. We used to make pinhole cameras in high school, where you basically just take a shoebox and you make it all black and you tape it all in solid black, and you just take a pin and you poke it in, put a piece of photo paper in there beforehand, and go outside with this box. Basically, just lift open your lid, the little pinhole that you made, and accept the light into the box, and that would create an image. Now, it was so haphazard and random because you're walking outside with a shoebox and then you point it at something and cross your fingers and hope that you got an image. But it was a great way to learn exposure. But sometimes what would happen is if maybe you had too much light coming in from one of the sides, you might get some edges that are really burnt out, or the edge exposure is really dark on those edges. So that kind of recreates that feel here. So with these sliders, what I like to do is I like to bring them all the way up and all the way down to see what's going to happen. With these, I really just want just the edges to be a little bit crispy, so you can see how that exposure comes up, bring it down. It's going to be white. It just depends on what look you want. I kind of like the whiter look. Well, let's go with the black look, because I think we'll get a nice color transition there. And I'm also going to add some color in there. So the color that's going to be added here is going to be a reddish color. Now you can modify that as you see fit to maybe be a yellow color, a green color, blue color, cyan, magenta, and then back to red on the opposite side of that spectrum. I'm going to keep it red because I like that, and then maybe just dock that opacity a little bit. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to click on this edge exposure and click on this side and do the same sort of thing here to increase the size and transition on the side there. And as I modify the color strength and the color here, you're going to see it's going to do it on the other side too. So if you move this over and you're wondering what the heck's going on, well, it's going to be working off of what's on the other side too. So I think that looks pretty good with the edge exposure. Let's go ahead and add a new layer here. And the new layer I'm going to add is going to be a dust and scratches layer. Now, with this webinar, I've created a series of textures and dusts and scratches that you can download. They're high-resolution 18 textures that I call the Fallen Textures package. And why I call it the Fallen Textures package is that these fallen textures are all from leaves that have fallen from the trees. They're autumn leaves, but I took my 5x macro lens and got really tight, so you get all the crackles and the veins and the nice oranges and reds and yellows. So after the webinar, you can go ahead and download that. It's 18 textures and 6 dust and scratches layers. Now here's the dust and scratches layers I'm talking about that I'm working with here. So with these dust and scratches layers, I made a series of different dust, and 6 of them that I really enjoy, that I actually used on my images before Topaz Labs made this so much easier for me in Texture Effects. I'm going to click on this one here. And you can increase the size of these if you'd like to. And basically what a dust and scratches layer is it's just a very high contrast black and white image that is set to either the screen or light and blend mode like you would see in Photoshop, but here that's all done for you. You don't have to worry about it. They did all that work for you. All you have to do is import the dust and scratches, and it's good to go. So with that, we'll go ahead, keep the size at 1.0, and then we'll look at the opacity here. If I bring it all the way up, it's going to basically show you what that whole dust and scratches texture looks like, or overlay. And then if I bring that down, we'll bring it down just a slight bit. And then here, if I wanted to add some color to that, I could, and then I could choose the color that I wanted, very similar to what I did with the edges. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to bring that down. I don't really want that to be that way. So I like what's going on here with this. Let me go ahead and make a new dust and scratches layer. So with this dust and scratches layer, I'm going to select my Fallen Textures package here and click on this one. This is one of my favorite ones that I've ever created. This dust and scratches layer is awesome. If you're ever out shooting anything really, I always suggest shooting for textures. And how you shoot for textures is you just get up close to something that looks really grungy or something, or maybe it's pastel, you like the colors that are in it, and you just shoot it. You shoot it flat. You really don't want any highlights or shadows in there. You just want a flat looking image. This is of a dumpster. So dumpsters are really unique because the paint on dumpsters routinely gets scratched in very unique ways. So this one's been scratched many years over the time of things hitting the side of it. I don't really want to know what made most of these scratches, but it made for a great dust and scratches overlay or texture that I could apply. So I'm going to bring the size up quite a bit here, and then maybe just knock down the opacity a little bit. So from here, I'm going to add a new texture. Before I actually go into that, one of the things I want to point out here when I'm looking at this dust and scratches layer is if you don't like the way this dust and scratches layer looks like this, try this invert button here. What that's going to do is it's going to take anything that was white, make it black, anything that was black, make it white, and it will apply it differently. So if you maybe want those areas that are cutting through that are white right here to actually be on the opposite side of the spectrum, we'll just press the invert button and it'll do that for you, which I think is pretty cool. So now I'm going to add a texture layer. So in that texture package that I created, we have the Fallen Textures pack. I'm going to go ahead and go to this one right here. So this texture, again, what I suggest you do with any textures or anything that you're going to apply here, bring the opacity all the way up so you know what you're working with. If you know what you're working with, it's really easy to understand what's going to be happening to your photo. Always bring that all the way up. Now down here you get your detail slider, and this is really a very helpful tool, because if you bring this all the way up, it's going to make everything, as you reduce the opacity, more, let's say, crunchy or grungy in the photo. But if you bring it all the way down, it's going to be a softer application of that texture over your image. Because if we bring this all the way up, look what's happened to that texture. That texture now has this blurred feel to it, which actually works a lot better as a blurred texture, because more of the color is coming through with a subtle texture rather than the texture as a whole. So always be looking at that. Bring that opacity all the way up so you can understand what happens with your color strength. You can understand what happens with your saturation, and then work from it from there and bring down your opacity to taste. That's one of the best ways to work with any texture or any effect for that matter. Even if you're in Photoshop and you're putting a hue saturation adjustment layer on there, toss that saturation all the way up to see what's happening to your photo, because how do you know what you're doing to it if you don't know exactly what happens when you bring it to its max? Bring it to its max, bring it to its min, and see what happens in between and what your eye is comfortable with. You'll see that your eye is going to be different than mine. Mine naturally said, "Ooh, stop there." It's like that old game. What was it? We had three people, and there was the little guy, and they go, "No whammies, no whammies, no whammies, stop!" And they hit the button, and then if it stopped on a whammy, they lost their turn and all their money. That's kind of how this works. All right, so you bring it all the way up, bring it all the way down, and no whammies. Okay, stop. Okay, there we go. I didn't get a whammy, but that's what my eye likes. Okay, so just an interesting way. That's how I edit, actually. If I'm actually editing these images by myself and I'm not in a webinar, I do these kinds of things with myself just because it makes the process a little bit more fun. All right, that's what we're here to do. We're here to have fun. But in there with that, I also want to talk about your blend mode here. So the blending mode here, I highly suggest you go through these blend modes, and you can go through pretty fast and see what happens. Soft light is an interesting one. I like soft light a lot most cases, but look what happens when I select subtract. Now, I don't really know what subtract means. I know that what happens here is that there's some type of subtraction processing happening, but what I really like is just the way it looks. Now my image immediately went from this kind of, calm, earthy feel to this almost cool, like maybe you shouldn't go surfing and the water is kind of cold. Well, it is on the West Coast, so the water was very cold type of feel. So you create the mood and the atmosphere with the colors that you apply. So really be thinking about that. And I really like what happens with this subtract when I add this here. So I really like this. I'm going to go ahead and save this texture or this effect. And actually what you can do after this webinar is go into the community here on Topaz Texture Effects, and you can go ahead and grab this effect. I'm just going to call this webinar 1 blue. I know it's a really creative effect there, but once this is over, I'll go ahead and upload all of these to the community so you can download them. So we'll call this travel, we'll call this vintage and landscape, okay? So then when the webinar is over, I'll go ahead and upload these and you can grab these. So we'll go ahead and press OK on this. Now the one thing that I did mention before is I always create a duplicate layer of my work before I start. And the reason why is because for me, I like the look of this texture, but it's almost too much. So there's some things that I could do here. I could go into the masking and I could paint in some stuff and block this stuff out and block that stuff out, but then you get this kind of unnatural look. Like if I were to go ahead and create a mask here and then brush with black on maybe these clouds back or the mountain back here, I don't really like the way it looks because it's kind of haphazard. Well, in Photoshop there's this great thing called blend if. And I've been on a blend if high for a very long time. If you've been following me for a while, you know that. I'm just going to go ahead and double click anywhere next to where it says that TE or whatever I labeled it. And here you can have blend if. And blend if can be really tricky because you immediately open the screen and you see down here it says blend if. It's like underlying layer, black, white, what am I doing here? Well, really, just call this protect. Protect the underlying layers blacks and protect the underlying layers whites. So if I move this slider over, you can start to see how all of the black stuff starts to get protected in the image from what's going on in the texture. And now you're probably thinking, well, Blake, that looks just as contrived as that horrible mask that you made, and you're right. But if I press Alt or Option and click right here and split this, that's going to fade that in. So now I've got this texture that's fading into my blacks, and I can do the same thing over here that could be fading into my whites. So now this texture doesn't look like it's just resting right on top of it, it looks like it's actually blending in with some of the features that are in the photo. And that's what I really like to do and how I use Topaz Texture Effects in conjunction with my images. I go into that blend if options and I protect some of those highlights and those shadows from actually being affected by the texture. All right, so that's image one where we talked about building a preset from nothing in Topaz Texture Effects. Now let's talk about taking a preset that already exists and modifying it to our liking. So this is actually pretty creepy. The other day I was at the zoo with my sons, and we're going through the entire zoo at all the really cool animals, and the one thing that both of them, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, liked the most was the crocodile. My 2-year-old was like right up in the face of the glass. I mean, here you got this crocodile, looks like he's gonna eat him and make a really nice healthy snack because he's a 32-pound 2-year-old. But there was glass in front. Don't worry, okay? So this crocodile was in the water, and it was just looked like it's dead. You know how they do that? They just sit there with their legs and their tail out, and you're like, that thing's got to be dead. Well, then it just crested to the top. And here you are looking at the crocodile's eyes that are looking directly at you. But the creepy thing about this is that you don't know if this right here is the front or the back. So you don't know what part of it is going to make you a snack. And my other job is actually writing Dr. Seuss books. I just made a nice little rhyme there. Actually, I don't write Dr. Seuss books. That was a lie. But you can see with this crocodile, look around it. There's a blur, there's bokeh, and what else is there? If you answered that there's quite a blank canvas there for me to work off of, then you learned something from the first image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open this up, go to Filter, go to Topaz Labs, and go to Texture Effects. And you made this plugin a lot faster now. I barely have time to take a sip of tea as I'm working here. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and scroll down through these. Basically what I'm doing is I want to find a preset that's already been built for me that's going to make a really interesting photograph here. And actually, one of the things that I'm going to do first is I'm going to cancel out of here and Control J, duplicate that background layer. Always duplicate that background layer. Go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and then go to Texture Effects. That's important because if you know what foreshadowing is in the movie industry, I just foreshadowed that I'm probably going to do some blend if on this image. Okay, so I'm going to go back to these presets that are here in the featured section and just kind of scroll through and see which preset I like. Now, I want to go for a swampy kind of dismal look. So either this Mechanic Grime or this Midnight Lake will work. And I think the Midnight Lake will work best, or even Muddy Rivers. Let's go with Midnight Lake. I mean, both of those really do describe places that a crocodile could be. So we're going to go with Midnight Lake. And if I click right here where you see these sliders, that's going to go ahead and open up the different things that are going on in the this preset that's already been built for me by the featured section from Topaz Labs. So one of the things I'm going to do before I do everything, I'm going to turn the eyeball off on the basic adjustments, turn it back on. Turn it off on the textures, turn it back on. What I'm doing here is I'm getting an analysis of the things that I like are going on with this preset and the things that I don't like that are going on with this preset, and that helps me build off of it and what I'm going to do with it in the future. So looking at this, I like the texture that's on there. I like the color overlay that's on there. I really like the split tone that's on there. And I do like the vignetted border that's on there. The one thing I'm not too keen on are the basic adjustments. I think it's doing a little too much contrast to the image. And that's no fault of the preset creator. That's just that maybe the preset that this was created for wasn't exactly right for the image that I'm using it on. So don't ever say, oh, well, this doesn't work because this person made this preset and it looks horrible on my photo. Well, maybe it's because the photo that they made the preset from, that just happened to work. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the basic adjustments here by pressing this trash can. So I'm modifying what's already been given to me by Topaz Labs, and I'm progressing on. So here with all these other effects that I'm going to add here, I'm going to add a texture. And one of the textures that I'm going to add is going to be from that Fallen Textures package. Okay, I really like these textures and what's going on here. And if you scroll through these, you can kind of see that these actually do work really well for a crocodile with all like the craquelure looking effects, and it looks pretty cool. I'm going to go with this bottom one here. So with this bottom one, I'm going to select that bottom texture, and we have the size sliders here, we have the opacity sliders here. This is what that texture looks like. It's a very nice, bright, vibrant texture that looks really nice all on its own. Again, these are all very high-res textures that you're able to download. But one of the things that I want to do is look at the size of this texture and where it's coming in on my image. So when I look at the size of this texture just happens to work so perfectly with this image, because if we look at this cracking vein that's coming through here and then around the eye, it looks like it's wrapping very nicely around the eye, but at this point it's a distraction. So I'm going to move the size of that up so that it just kind of cradles the bottom of that eye. So this cracking effect here just scoots right in and underneath that eye. I did not plan this, okay? That just worked out so perfect for this photograph. But the point to take away here is that sometimes you do need to increase that size of that aspect ratio of that texture so that it fits your image the way it should. Maybe zooming into that texture looks better than that texture just laying right on top of it. So experiment with those things. So let's look at what we can do with the actual opacity and everything else here. So we increase the size, the opacity. Let's go ahead and bring the opacity up a little bit. Let's bring that up to about 0.25. My eye likes it about a little bit up. So a little bit up. Maybe a little lower. Yeah, I'm looking at it a little lower. So right about down here, because I don't want that texture to be, so much that it overtakes the image. So I'll move that down to about 0.25. And let's look at the detail on this. And as we look at the detail, we bring it up. It's going to bring in more detail, not on the image, but on the texture that's being applied to the image. Okay, so I'm going to bring that down a slight bit so that really these veins become more like cracked assets to the photo rather than a distraction to the photo. Okay, so I'm going to bring that detail down quite a bit and leave it just at about right there. That should be good. And then I'm going to look at the saturation, the color saturation. I like the red color saturation that's coming through here, so I'm going to bring that up quite a bit. So at this point, I've got a very nice texture overlay here that I do like. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as something else, and I'm going to be really creative and call this Webinar Preset 2. And we'll call this, I guess, Earthy and Nature, and let's see, Still Life, Wildlife. That'll work. Perfect, and then go ahead and save that so that after this webinar I'll go ahead and upload that to the community that's here. So I'll go ahead and press OK. All right, and now we're in Photoshop again. So as I said before, I do want to go into the blend if principles here and bring back some of those blacks, because the next thing I'm going to do is going to go into Topaz Glow and then Impression and really make this image kind of pop off the page in a different way. So I'm going to go ahead and look at those blacks coming through in the image by moving this over here and then Alter option to split that and slide it over. So if you missed it in the first part, just double click anywhere next to that layer and then go in here to your blend if principles, underlying layer, protection. So protect the black areas from what's happening with this layer. That's basically what that means. Protect anything underneath this layer that's black and protect anything underneath this layer that might be white, because that's going to help this image kind of pop off a little bit more. So now I'm going to duplicate this. I'll just call this TE again, so we know that that's Texture Effects. I'm going to press Command or Control J to duplicate that, and I'm going to go into Filter, Topaz Labs, and Glow. Now, Glow is really interesting because it can create these really otherworldly types of effects on your images that almost look futuristic, that have these intricate line work that happens around your photograph. So as we go into this, if we just go into some of these, like the neon effect, you'll see that it really reduces and simplifies that image down to this. And first impression of this is like, I know my first impression was like, this is just not going to work with my photo. But now I've gotten to a point where it doesn't matter which one of these I select, because I can make it work for my photo. So even if I select this Brilliant Fibers 3, if I change this to something like Soft Light, it can do some really interesting things to my photograph to make it look nice. Now, Soft Light, I've talked about Soft Light before, so what exactly is Soft Light? Well, let's break down the Soft Light blend mode real quick. What Soft Light blend mode means is that anything that is 50% gray in your photograph, or neutral grayish, we'll call it, will not be affected by anything in the photo. So if this layer has anything neutral gray, if this neon layer had anything neutral gray in it, it will not be applied to the photo. But if it's white, it will amplify that so that it gets whiter but never get to pure white, and it will get darker but never get to pure black as it applies itself to the underlying layer. Now, how that works for your blues, reds, and greens, well, if it's a neutral blue area, then it's not going to do anything, but if it's a vibrant blue, then it's going to actually make that area more blue. If it's a more yellow, then it's going to make that area more yellow, but never get to pure yellow. So it not only affects your lights and darks, it also affects your RGB channels too. So it's a really interesting thing to use when you go to soft light. It will apply things. Typically what it does is it makes things look a little bit more vibrant, gives it a little bit more punch, but it protects your gray areas. So basically it protects your neutral areas, gives you more punch. That's what you need to think about with soft light. But I'm going to go into the featured or the afterglow section here because radiate is one of my favorites. So I'll go into this radiate, and you can look at the settings here and you can increase the edge color and you can do some really interesting things with these. But what I would suggest you do before you get into any of that, if you're going to use this method, is actually go into soft light and then do it. So look at what happens when you increase your edge sharpness in the way that you're going to apply this layer to your image, because it will change. It doesn't look like it's changing because remember, we're in the soft light option or the soft light blend mode here, but look at the simplified details. Look at how as we bring that down, it makes all the colors around our detail areas a little bit more punchy, but as we bring it up, it just kind of softens those areas out. So you can modify this soft light glowing effect right here in glow, which can be very powerful. If we bring the detail strength up, you're going to see all of the different intricate line work happening. If we change this back to normal, this is what this would actually look like normal, but if we change it to soft light, this is how we're going to be affecting it, so this is how we're going to apply it. Okay, so I'll bring that detail strength down, and then if you had that secondary glow, you can add that too, and then you get the exact same kind of settings here for that secondary glow, where you can bring things in and modify that image accordingly. So I kind of like what's going on here because if we look at our before and our after, it's added a nice little punch to this photograph, but done it in a very detail-oriented way. Now, I could have just duplicated that layer and changed it to soft light like you saw before, but it wouldn't have the punch that you get with glow because you get to accent all those intricate details with glow, and that's why I really like using glow. I never, I don't ever like saying never, so I very rarely use glow as those presets look and as they're intended. I use them with soft light or hard light or overlay or some type of blending option that's just going to add some more vital punch to my photograph that it actually needs. So we'll just rename this layer glow. Now, if we look at this, our blending options are still here because we duplicated this layer. So let's take a look at that. Do we like what's happening with those blend options? Well, I think at this point, I think I like what's happening there because I like that that area is black. So I'll press Alt or Option and split that open. But if you didn't want those blend options there, you'd reset all those blending options for this given layer. So now let's go ahead and go into impression and see what we can do with impression with this. So here we started with texture effects, we built on it with glow, and now we're going to build on it with impression. So I'll call this just impression layer, okay? So I'm going to go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and go to Impression. Another plugin that you typically would use to simplify your image and make it look more like digital art, but how it can be used here and applied here very much the same way we apply glow, in a very subtle way that actually amplifies and adds to the image rather than just making it a piece of art or what looks like a piece of art. Because to me this is almost abstract. Yeah, I do like what it looks like, but I want the impression effect to really just kind of lay on the image and not be the sole reason the image was created, if you know what I mean. So I want it to be an effect for the photograph and not actually be what makes the photograph or final piece of art, if you want to call it that. So I'm going to go into painting, and one of my favorite presets for this is the oil glaze preset. So scroll down into painting, go to oil glaze by Blake Rudis, and then if you look at this, what it really does, it doesn't look like it's doing a whole lot to our actual detail areas because it's only doing a little bit in the way of brush strokes, but look what's happening to the background. It really simplifies everything and pushes everything back, and that's kind of why I created this oil glaze preset. Now it does make a good finished painted product, but it also makes a very good way to push back the detail in the image. So a lot of times I'll use this in the background of my photographs and you don't even notice it because I'll drop the opacity down to about 40 or 50%, so it's barely even doing anything in the background layer, but then I'll go on here and make a mask and I'll paint with black on the area that I don't want this to affect at all, and that will really bring those areas forward. So now we're really bringing those eyes forward because they are not being creatively blurred by the impression effect where everything else is. And it's a very powerful way to use it because now we're pushing back that background and really letting you bring the foreground or the focal point right into your face like we want it to be, because after all, it is the focal point. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do something. I'm going to add a gradient map. So with this gradient map, I want this gradient map to be set to black and white. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to make sure that there's a solid black point and a solid white point somewhere in my photograph. So as I look at this, I'm saying, well, it's almost there, but not quite there. How can I punch this up? That's where I go into soft light, or go into curves, and I will go ahead and drop this down a little bit so that something in here is pure white. If I press Alt or Option, you'll see that those areas start to really pop out where those pure whites are. But what that's doing is it's brightening up the whole image. Essentially, it's a lot easier to see this in tone than it is in color. Okay, so change that, put the gradient map above there so you can see it in black and white, and then all you have to do is turn this eyeball off and just watch how all those colors just kind of pop off and lift off the page a little bit. And then the last thing I would do here is probably crop this so that the crocodile is resting on one of those rule of thirds points, so that it's kind of like that right there, and that's good for me right there. So one of the last things I want to show you, I think I got a couple minutes here for this. I'm going to go into my example number 3. And in this example number 3, I'm going to start in Impression. So Command-Control-J to duplicate that background layer, go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and go to Impression. So I'm going to start in Impression, and I'm going to finish in Texture Effects. All right, so in this Impression, I've actually created my own other oil glaze preset, and I'm very creative with my names. Remember, I told you that this is Blake Rudis' Oil Glaze 2. All right, just as creative as I am with my webinar presets. Imagine that. So this is just a spin-off of the oil glaze that I've created before. This is one that I casually use here and there, very, very much the same way I would use the oil glaze. So really, what I'm doing there is just pushing that down to simplify it. Like I said before, textures work best on areas of simplified imagery. So this whole image has now been simplified because I used Impression on it to push everything back and make it all subtle. I'm not even going to use any blend if principles here, because now when I go into Texture Effects, you'll see how well Texture Effects plays with everything else. Texture Effects is like the Topaz Labs team player. I mean, this is the one that you want on your team. It just plays so nicely with everyone. If there was a report card for Texture Effects in the comments section, it would say, a pleasure to have in class, plays well with others. So we're going to go ahead and press reset and go to OK. And I'm going to go ahead and add an adjustment here. And I'm going to go to Texture. And I'm going to add a leaf texture to here. So go back into that Fallen Textures Effects. And let's go into something like, let's go to this one. I like this one. That'll work. Yeah, let's go to that one. Again, I'm going to drop down the detail a little bit. So the detail just kind of pushes itself away a little bit. And then maybe increase that size a little bit, because maybe I don't want that detail to be so stark where those veins are coming through, but I kind of like the light that's coming through in this section here. And then if I increase or decrease the saturation here, I can get more of that warm color coming through, and then maybe drop that opacity so it's not so much so powerful. Okay, so now I can actually kind of increase that detail a little bit because I dropped the opacity. These kind of sliders play hand in hand. There's the before and the after so far. And then maybe I'll go into Dust and Scratches, and I'll go into that Fallen Textures, and let's choose this one. I kind of like this. At this point, it almost looks like an old school mosaic. It's got kind of this craquelure look. So even though I'm adding the textures to it, it still has that painted feel, which can be a very powerful effect. So I'll increase that size a little bit here, and then maybe decrease that opacity a little bit. And if I wanted to add some color to this, I could do that also. Maybe I should balance that out a little bit by giving it more of a magenta color there. And then I'll go ahead and I'm going to add another Dust and Scratches layer here. And I'm going to go back into that Fallen Textures and go add the exact same one, but this time I'm going to flip it horizontal and flip it vertical. So we got a crack going through this way, a crack going through this way, and I'll increase the size on this one. And the reason why is because you don't want this to look like a really repeated pattern, okay? Sometimes if you see repeated patterns in things, it's really easy to spot. You just pick it out immediately. And you're like, oh, that's a repeated pattern. So you know that I actually made the exact same this way. I flipped it horizontal and also increased the size so that it doesn't look exactly like the one on the other side. And then again, drop the opacity on this a little bit and press OK. open us up back in Photoshop. And now I can do the exact same thing. Maybe I don't want that cracular looking effect to happen on the blacks. Maybe the paint that I used in the 1500s, the black had a little bit more egg in it than the white did. So if I go ahead and go into double click here and go into alter option and split that, I can now protect those black areas from anything happening to them. And that kind of comes through. Maybe even do that a little bit in the whites to protect those areas too. So the real takeaway here is how you build up your workbench, and to know that, yes, Texture Effects can do textures, but it can do so much more. It's got so much that's plugged into it that makes it a very versatile tool in your artistic workflow. So it's not just the tool, it's the workbench. It plays well with others. If it was to be a tool, it would be a multi-tool. It'd be a screwdriver with removable tips, with multiple tips, so that you can do all kinds of stuff. But it also plays well with many of the other options that you have with the Topaz product line. So just, play with it, experiment with it. The best thing you can do in your artistic workflow is to experiment, and really set aside time to experiment, because if you don't, if you're just trying to pop something up real quick and make it work, it's not always going to happen. Sometimes you need that experimentation time. You say, okay, I'm going to take an hour just to create presets. I'm not trying to make anything beautiful, not trying to make anything grand. I'm not trying to, make a gallery piece. All I want to do is know what's going to happen when I combine this, this, and this, and see what works. And if it works, repeat the pattern, and you're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for going over this, Blake. This is awesome. You can follow Blake, check out his workshops and his tutorials and products at everydayhdr.com. And again, go to everydayhdr.com/texture-effects-webinar to check out the resources. If you have any questions, you can contact us at webinars@topazlabs.com. We'll get to you as soon as we can. We do have some emails that are stacked up, so it might be a couple business days, but we'll definitely get to you. And if you have any, if you want to sign up for upcoming sessions, you can do so at topazlabs.com/webinars. All right, thank you so much, Blake. Appreciate it.
It really is my pleasure. It's always an honor to be here. You put on the best webinars I've ever seen, so thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.